enough to function. The pitch is clean and the brochures are convincing. But there are 10 locations inside this country where the ordinary rules of access break down entirely. Not because of bad luck, because of geology, law, sovereignty, and the cold logic of infrastructure that was never built to last. The price of entry isn't the barrier here. The terrain is the threat. And by the time you understand what these zones actually cost, you'll see New Zealand very differently. Zone 10, Forgotten World Highway, State Highway. 43 runs 148 kilometres between Taumarunui and Stratford across 4 mountain saddles and through the Tangarakau Gorge. NZ Police ranked it among the 10 worst roads in the country. Not the 10 most scenic, the 10 worst. Hit subscribe for future videos about New Zealand real estate. The government spent 23 million New Zealand dollars just to seal the last 12 kilometres of gravel on that route. The project was finally completed in March 2025 after weather events repeatedly shut down construction across 2023 and 2024. 4 additional retaining walls had to be built mid-project to stop the road dropping out entirely during rain. That is not a road being improved. That is a road being kept alive on a drip feed. 0 mobile coverage through the gorge. Single-lane bridges throughout. Local residents once erected homemade signs declaring the road closed in protest at its condition. Think about that. Not a government closure. Citizens putting up their own signs because the state of the road was that bad. Without continuous public subsidy, this highway reverts to gravel, then to track, then to bush. One weather event from impassable. That is not a retreat route. That is a trap with a scenic rating. Zone 9. Campbell Island, 700 kilometres south of Bluff, capped at 600 visitors per year, and every single one of those visitors submits to a full biosecurity inspection before they set foot on the island. In 2001, DOC dropped Brodawhakum bait by helicopter across all 11,300 hectares of Campbell Island to eradicate rats. It was the largest rodent eradication project in the world at the time. Cost 2.7 million New Zealand dollars. The Norway rat had already driven 3 land bird species to extinction on the main island and decimated ground-nesting seabird populations. DOC didn't negotiate with that outcome. They poisoned the entire island from the air. There is a single Sitka spruce on Campbell Island. 1 tree. The nearest companion tree is over 200 kilometres away on the Auckland Islands. Guinness recognises it as the world's most isolated tree. GNS science researchers found its growth rings hold a preserved radiocarbon signal from 1950s and 60s atmospheric nuclear tests, making it a candidate marker for the formal start of the Anthropocene epoch. Human ambition was literally removed from this island. The farms were abandoned, the infrastructure stripped, the rodents poisoned at scale, the island reset. The forbidden quality here is not punitive, it is precautionary. Every human who sets foot on Campbell Island is a potential vector of destruction, and DOC treats that fact with complete seriousness. Medical evacuation from Campbell Island requires a military or charter flight of extreme range, and weather can make even that impossible. There is no medevac threshold that makes this island safe for an emergency. That is a fact, no access permit changes. Zone 8. Billionaire bunkers. Peter Thiel received New Zealand citizenship in 2011 after spending 12 days in the country. The government agreed to keep the arrangement secret. It stayed secret until 2016. He purchased a 477-acre property on Lake Wanaka for 13.5 million New Zealand dollars. His application to build a 10-bedroom compound designed by the architects of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Stadium was rejected by Queenstown Lakes District Council in August 2022 for adverse landscape effects. Texas firm Rising S Company has built 38 bunkers in New Zealand for American buyers. Average cost, 3 million New Zealand dollars for a 150-ton steel shelter buried 4 metres underground. Queenstown Airport routinely runs out of space for private jets. Luxury mansions sit empty around the basin. The gates are visible. The exit strategy inside is not. You cannot audit a bolt hole you don't own. Zone 7. Waitangi Treaty Grounds. Heritage New Zealand describes the Waitangi Treaty Grounds as the most symbolically important place in New Zealand. That is not marketing language. Te Tiriti o Waitangi was first signed here on the 6th of February 1840 between the British Crown and Maori chiefs. The document that created this country was executed on this land. The grounds are open 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside those hours, they revert to private management under the Waitangi National Trust, a body with embedded Ngapuhi governance interests. And here is where the sovereign risk becomes concrete. The treaty's Article 1 is a constitutional fault line that has never been resolved. In the Maori text, chiefs ceded kawanatanga, which means governance. The English text said sovereignty. Those are not the same concept, and the gap between them has never been formally closed. Sections 8A and 8B of the Treaty of Waitangi Act, 1975, give the Waitangi Tribunal power to recommend land return and halt state asset transfers. That power is active. It has been used. After hours, any activity on these grounds is not merely trespass. It is an act inside a contested sovereignty jurisdiction. Rangkatira Tangha, the authority Ngapuhi hold over their taonga, does not pause because a visitor's watch says 5:01 p.m. The law here does not simplify at closing time. It layers. For anyone treating New Zealand as a stable common law jurisdiction with clean property rights, Waitangi is the case study that forces a rethink. Sovereign risk is not always a foreign government changing a tax regime overnight. Sometimes it is a constitutional ambiguity that has been building for 185 years, and the grounds where it lives are open to tourists until late afternoon. Zone 6. Disappointment Island. The name was not chosen for drama. 19th century mariners applied it after arriving and finding no anchorage, no fresh water, and no shelter. The name is a logistical briefing, not a complaint. Disappointment Island sits 450 kilometers south of Bluff. The furious 50s winds better it for more than 100 days per year. The nearest neighbour is over 200 kilometers away. DOC permits 2 to 3 researchers per year to land on it. Since the 1907 wreck of the Dundonald, only 10 people are known to have camped overnight on the island. Access to the broader Auckland Islands starts at 2,500 New Zealand dollars plus GST, requires strict maritime compliance, and a DOC representative must accompany all tourists. Approximately 65,000 pairs of white-capped albatrosses breed on Disappointment Island. That is nearly the entire world population of the species. DOC is not being cautious about access for procedural reasons. They are protecting an irreplaceable global ecology from any introduced pest, pathogen, or human error. Weather can strand a vessel indefinitely. Medical evacuation does not exist at any realistic cost or timeline. The island is, in practice, inaccessible to everyone except the most prepared scientific expeditions. That is by design, and the design is working. Zone 5. Raoul Island. Raoul Island sits 1,000 kilometers northeast of mainland New Zealand. It anchors a vast exclusive economic zone projection into the Pacific. New Zealand must maintain a permanent presence on Raoul to justify that EEZ claim, so DOC stations rangers there. On March 17, 2006, Ranger Mark Kearney, 32, went to Green Lake Crater to collect water temperature samples. The volcano erupted with no warning. He was killed. The Smithsonian Global Volcanism Program recorded over 200 earthquakes near the island in the week before the eruption, but no water or temperature changes in the 24 hours prior. None. His 5 colleagues survived but could not locate him. The eruption had cleared 5 hectares of bush. In March 2021, a magnitude 8.1 earthquake caused over 300 landslides on the island. Biosecurity controls cover all clothing, footwear, food, and equipment. Recreational access is not being considered. New Zealand must garrison an island that is too dangerous to garrison. No government publicly admits that. Only the record does. Zone 4. Otira Tunnel. The Otira Railway Tunnel is 8.5 kilometers long, single track, unlit, and runs under the Southern Alps at a gradient of 1 in 33. It opened in 1923. At the time, it was the longest tunnel in the British Empire. A century later, it is still the only rail connection between the West Coast and the rest of the South Island. 5 diesel DX locomotives haul 30 coal wagons weighing 72 tonnes each through that tube multiple times a day. 5 engines burning fuel inside an enclosed 8.5 kilometre corridor with no formed walkway on either side of the track. The CO, NO, X, and particulate levels that generates can be lethal if ventilation fails. The entire system depends on 1 sliding door and 2 fan lines. If those fans stop, train control cannot allow any departure until a qualified person is physically present at the tunnel portal to operate the system by hand. In 2020, Whakaari formally determined that Kiwi Rail's activities in the Otira tunnel could cause death, serious injury, or significant property damage. That determination came after Whakaari had been seeking safety assurances from Kiwi Rail since 2013, 7 years of requests. In July 2023, officials described Kiwi Rail's risk management in the tunnel as reactionary and backward-looking. The Transalpine runs through this tunnel. It is marketed as one of the world's great train journeys. It passed through a tunnel. Regulators classified as potentially lethal for a full decade, while that marketing continued. The tunnel cannot be bypassed. Electrification is prohibitively expensive given the grade and the geology. A second bore is not on any credible funding schedule. One fan failure away from a mass casualty event, and the fix costs more than any government has been willing to spend. Zone 3, Pike River Mine. At 3:44 p.m. on the 19th of November 2010, the Pike River underground coal mine in the Paparoa Range exploded. 29 men died from the blast or the toxic atmosphere. 2 who were near the entrance escaped. The mine was sealed after 3 further explosions over the following 9 days. The Royal Commission was unambiguous. The deaths were entirely preventable. Non-functioning gas sensors, flawed electrical systems, a management culture that put production ahead of safety. Every failure was known and unresolved before the explosion. The Labour government elected in 2017 established the Pike River Recovery Agency to re-enter the drift tunnel and recover the men. The agency reached 2.2 kilometres up the access tunnel in February 2021 at a cost of 51 million New Zealand dollars. That was more than double the original 23 million New Zealand dollars budget. Minister Andrew Little then stated it was too difficult and too expensive to go further. No bodies were recovered. The tunnel was sealed again. The agency was disestablished in July 2022. The Pike 29 Memorial Track opened in February 2024. Walkers can now travel to the Pike Valley site and view the mine portal from a distance. They cannot enter. The total public cost, across the recovery agency, legal proceedings, and memorial infrastructure, comfortably exceeds 100 million New Zealand dollars. The asset it was spent on has zero commercial value. Pike River is a publicly funded tomb inside a national park. Zone 2, the pattern before. Zone 1. Every zone covered so far has failed in one of 3 ways: geological violence, ecological imperative, infrastructure fragility. Raoul kills the people sent to protect it. Otira keeps running because stopping it would sever a region. Pike River absorbed over $100 million and gave nothing back. But one location in New Zealand combines all 3 failure modes and adds a 4th: private ownership, legal liability, and a duty of care the courts are still arguing about. One family owns an active volcano they cannot sell, cannot develop, and cannot safely enter. That is Zone 1. In 1936, an Auckland stockbroker named George Raymond Buddle purchased an active volcanic cone rising 321 metres from the Bay of Plenty, 48 kilometres offshore from Whakaari. He refused to sell it to the government. In 1952, he agreed to have it declared a private scenic reserve. In 2012, ownership transferred to the Whakaari Trust, controlled by brothers Peter, Andrew, and James Buddle. The island became a commercial tourism operation. Helicopters flew in. Cruise ship passengers walked the crater floor. The hazard was the attraction. At 2:11 p.m. on December 9, 2019, Whakaari erupted without warning. 47 people were on the volcano. 22 died, including 17 Australians. All 25 survivors suffered serious injuries. Many had burns to up to 90% of their bodies. Tours have been banned since that afternoon. WorkSafe, NZ, charged 13 parties. On March 1st, 2024, Judge Thomas imposed 10.21 million New Zealand dollars in reparations and 2 million New Zealand dollars in fines across 6 guilty defendants: Whakaari Management Limited, White Island Tours, Volcanic Air Safaris, Kahu NZ Limited, Arius, and G&S Science. Then on February 27, 2025, the High Court quashed Whakaari Management Limited's conviction entirely. The company did not actively manage or control the workspace. Ownership on its own was insufficient. Read that twice. A family owns an active volcano where 22 people died. The courts ruled the act of ownership alone does not create legal responsibility for what happens on that land. G&S Science reported in 2024 that scientists still cannot access Whakaari to service monitoring equipment. The geological threat that killed 22 people is now a surveillance blind spot. The island sits in the Bay of Plenty, active, unmonitored, and legally contested, while the courts continue to define what responsibility actually means when the hazard is the product. The Buttle family still owns it. They own an asset that cannot be safely monetized, cannot be sold at its former valuation, and cannot be developed. The commercial value of Whakaari derived entirely from its volcanism. The eruption destroyed that value overnight and replaced it with liability, legal proceedings, and a permanent exclusion zone. The price was not the barrier. The geology was the warning, and the warning was ignored for decades because the geology was also the revenue. This is not an unusual failure mode. It is the logical conclusion of treating a geological hazard as a commercial product without accounting for the exit cost when that product activates. Every dollar earned from tours on Whakaari was earned inside a risk envelope that had no realistic closure mechanism. For anyone using New Zealand as a Plan B jurisdiction, Whakaari is the clearest proof the country offers that private land ownership and personal safety are not the same guarantee. You can own the asset. You can grant access to the asset, and when the asset kills people, the courts will spend years deciding whether you are responsible for any of it. The island is still there, still active, still privately owned, still forbidden, and still, as of 2024, beyond the reach of the scientists trying to watch it. Every zone so far has been forbidden for reasons you can at least see: a crater floor, a sealed tunnel portal, a biosecurity checkpoint, a private gate with a camera above it. Waihopai is different. The station sits in a valley near Blenheim, surrounded by stony farmland, protected by a wire fence and a camera line. You could drive past it. The fence is not extraordinary. The redomes were. 2 giant white fiberglass spheres, each housing an 18-metre satellite dish visible from the road for years until the GCSB decommissioned them in November 2021, citing changes in telecommunications. The dishes are gone. The station is not. Construction was authorised in 1987. Operations began in 1989. The GCSB runs it as part of the Five Eyes Alliance, the signals interception network shared between New Zealand, Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Snowden documents confirm that GCSB shares intercepted data with the NSA via ICSI score, targeting island nations across the Asia-Pacific. One NSA memo described New Zealand's contribution as providing valuable access not otherwise available, specifically because of where New Zealand sits in the Pacific. Geography, again, is the asset. Budget allocations across 2019 and 2020 combined 150 million New Zealand dollars in new capabilities for the GCSB. The redomes came down. The investment went up. Whatever replaced satellite dish interception at Waihopai cost significantly more than what it replaced. In April 2008, 3 members of the Anzac Ploughshares group cut the perimeter fence and deflated 1 redome with sickles. At trial, the jury acquitted all 3. The defence argued the station contributed to war and torture, and the jury accepted it. Prime Minister Helen Clark called it senseless vandalism. The acquittal stood. The legal perimeter is Section 78 of the Intelligence and Security Act 2017, which criminalises unauthorised access. The physical perimeter is a wire fence. The real perimeter is classification. The target lists, the intelligence products, the sharing protocols, all of it operates under Five Eyes arrangements that are themselves classified. The GCSB released a video tour of one dome for its 30th anniversary. That is the extent of public access. Here is the investor angle, and it is the coldest one on this list. Every other zone involves a government restricting your access for reasons it will at least acknowledge. Ecological protection, safety, treaty obligations. At Waihopai, the state is restricting access to protect its own operational capacity, including the capacity to monitor the communications of every government, business, and individual in its designated area of coverage. True privacy is not something Waihopai grants. It is something Waihopai consumes. The institution that surveils the Pacific has the authority to classify its own activities beyond any effective public review. That is not a conspiracy. That is a statute. New Zealand is not a surveillance-free bolt hole. It is a node in the most sophisticated signals interception network ever built. The fence around Waihopai is not the boundary of the surveillance. It is just the part of the surveillance you can see. 10 zones, 5 failure modes, One pattern: geological violence, ecological necessity, infrastructure fragility, legal liability, and sovereign complexity. New Zealand is not a simple Plan B. It is a jurisdiction where the cost of access, the cost of staying, and the cost of your exit strategy can all exceed the value of the asset before you realise the calculation was wrong. The price was never the barrier. The land was always the risk. Subscribe if you want more intelligence on the real estate traps and geopolitical risks the brochures skip. Share this with anyone building a Plan B on assumptions they haven't tested yet.